You're listening to Health Innovators, a podcast and video show about the leaders, influencers, and early adopters who are shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Roxy Mooney. Welcome back to the show, Health Innovators. On today's episode, I'm sitting down with Warren Schirtzinger, who is the managing partner at High Tech Strategies. Welcome to the show, Warren.
Hi, Dr. Roxy. It's good to see you again.
Yes, it's good to have you here today. So I always like to start off each episode by giving our audience a little bit of an understanding about your background and what you've been up to these days.
Yep, absolutely. So I work on what I call both sides of the innovation coin. So I've had the chance to take and commercialize a lot of interesting innovations. So I introduced the very first rugged FTIR sensor for quality control, and I did the very first computerized posturography system for balance disorders, and I did the very first digital audio workstation in radio broadcast, and the first hybrid venture capital fund.
I did that old, Warren.
The list goes on and on. I did the first augmented reality for marine navigation, and the first vibration control for electronic vibration control for automobiles, and the first, and now, of course, the one that is really exciting is it's the first wearable device for peripheral edema. It measures ankle swelling. So that's one side of the coin. Lots and lots of commercialization work. But I also have, on the other side, been doing what I call framework or model development. And that's just because my grandfather worked with Everett Rogers at Ohio State when diffusion of innovations was being developed. So I got to, learn all about innovation adoption growing up, but then I was hired to help update that model, and it became the technology adoption lifecycle. And then my colleague and I updated it again, and it became the chasm. And we gave actually our chasm model to a writer. His name is Jeff Moore, and he wrote the book Crossing the Chasm. And then since Crossing the Chasm, I've developed two other models. One is called the low risk recipe. The other is the customer alignment lifecycle. So, I do frameworks, but I also do direct commercialization of what I call meaningful innovations.
What an incredible legacy that your grandfather has left for you. And who could imagine that how your career would be jump-started and catalyzed by your grandfather's work?
And they talk about following in someone's footsteps. There must be something that's in my DNA that just draws me to these new innovations. And I engage and actually get to manage their commercialization.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I'm very, very excited to speak to you today. I'm always excited to speak to all of my guests, but we are definitely kindred spirits. So for our audience that don't know who Everett is, who is Everett, and what is this diffusion of innovation model or framework you're talking about?
Yep, absolutely. So most people have come across a bell curve and a term called early adopter, and it's one of five of the categories, but it's a model that describes how people react when they are presented with a new innovation. And for every new innovation, and this is an important kind of distinction or nuance, is it's really the application of a technology or an innovation, not the technology itself. So, when someone is presented with something new, they self-select on this curve. They decide based on, their risk profile or their comfort level, where am I going to go in terms of accepting and using this new thing? Do I want to be first? Do I want to be absolutely first in line? Do I want to maybe be second, or do I want to be in the middle or do I want to see 1,000 other people use it first, and then maybe I'll say yes 5 years from now? But
The
people,
people that are using the flip phone, right?
right? Yep. So every person for every application of a technology, they self-select on the curve, decide when they're going to accept it. And it's it was developed by studying farmers. Everett Rogers comes from Iowa. He studied corn farmers in Iowa,
And what year?
and that was in the 50s. That was in the, I think 55, 56. He became a professor of Ohio State in 57. And he published Diffusion of Innovations in 1962.
So it's been around a while.
It's been around a while, but it is so fabulous how repeatable and useful that framework is. It's a system that really shows you how people are going to either step back or step up when you present something new to them. And it's not necessarily just a technology. It could be an idea, a concept, a business model. There are all these different types of things that are just new, and they're considered an innovation. So it doesn't have to be a technology. And Diffusion of Innovations does a magnificent job of characterizing how that innovation is accepted by a population or a market.
So I know there's someone in our audience that is thinking this. They probably won't admit it, but they're thinking this. That probably works fantastic in all those other verticals, but does that really work in healthcare too?
Right. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And again, the determining factor really is how comfortable someone is with risk. So it really, if you're selling or you're trying to commercialize a new car or a new healthcare innovation, it doesn't matter. People will evaluate the risk of adopting. And that's why it's got such, fabulous, flexibility, and the way it can be applied is every time someone encounters something new, there is an element of risk to be evaluated. And that's why it's so translatable across all of these industries. And you think about all the industries that I mentioned, right, when we first started. It's industrial automation, it's healthcare, it's marine navigation, it's digital for radio broadcast, it's even venture capital, a new venture capital model. It's education, you name it. If there's a new innovation, it represents risk. People decide how they want to accept it or not, and when, and what's required before they say yes. And so it's translatable anywhere. That's why I love it.
I love it too. And I talk about this a lot in a lot of the content, a lot of episodes on the show, probably not to the depth that we're going to go into today, because you are so well versed in this framework and in this model. I definitely want to take advantage of this opportunity to go deeper for our audience. But one of the questions that comes to mind is, gosh, Warren, if this model has been published since the 1960s.
Right.
And I have had hundreds and hundreds of innovators come on this show and talk about their commercialization journey. And not one of them has built their commercialization strategy on the diffusion of innovation model.
Yes.
As well as none of the clients that I've ever worked with brought the diffusion of innovation model to me. It was always something that I was bringing to them.
Right.
And I know that you have similar experience.
Yep.
Where is the breakdown? Why aren't we seeing more innovators, more inventors leverage this model and framework to maximize their success?
Yep. Well, so you've just articulated the reason that 95% of all products fail. is because founders are not paying attention to the way that the end user, the buyer, the customer, they're not paying attention to how they react to a new innovation. They're not paying attention to what's the sequence of adopter types, and why is it a model that is proven is not being used is actually quite a mystery. And it's almost kind of a tragedy too. If you think about all of the resources that are wasted, when you think about 95% failure rate, think of the time, the money that is going nowhere. And I don't know why. I don't want to sound overly pessimistic here, but I think part of diffusion of innovations and the innovation adoption curve, it requires you to do a lot of reinvention. If you think about it, you start out, you serve innovators, then you have to reinvent what you're doing, and then you serve early adopters, then you reinvent what you're doing, and you serve the mainstream early majority. So it's constant reinvention. It's not necessarily straightforward, easy. It's not a slam dunk. And I actually think a lot of, unfortunately, founders are looking for shortcuts.
Yeah.
They don't want to do the hard work.
Yeah.
And
time, right? It takes time to build out 5 different go-to-market strategies that it does one.
Absolutely. And to just always monitor, where are you? Okay. So, if you're currently serving early adopters and you need to now change your go-to-market for the mainstream, wow, is that a big change? So it essentially has implications across your business. All of your business disciplines change, not just the product. And it's a lot. Maybe that's why I had someone who recently graduated from Harvard in their MBA program, and he said they have quit teaching diffusion of innovations in Harvard Business School. They have stopped. And I'm devastated, right?
Mind-blowing to me.
Why you would
Christensen would be turning over in his grave right now.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yes. Ugh. So I was actually horrified, because it's all of these commercialization things that I've been through. I use it religiously. The success rate is sky high. It's well over 90% success. Why wouldn't you follow this model? What,
right.
So I don't know.
Yeah. Uh-huh. We could probably talk the rest of the episode about this, but I won't belabor the issue. I think you've made the point, and I completely agree with you. So I want to, going back to this failure rate, right? I preach about this failure rate because it keeps me up at night, right? Yep. We're spending pouring trillions of dollars into healthcare innovation. Lives are at stake. Quality of life is at stake. It's such an important thing. And in the fact that 95% fail is just so disturbing.
Yep.
So when you think about what's happening in the marketplace, what are we still missing?
Yep.
That is preventing us from changing that success rate or from driving adoption?
Yep, absolutely. All right. So the number one thing that I think is being missed, maybe I'll answer this as a 2-part thing, but to start with, it's too much focus on the technology and not enough focus on the application. Mm-hmm. So, like a lot of times I'll hear someone say, well, artificial intelligence is about ready to move into the mainstream. Well, that's a misinterpretation because the innovation adoption process is not about artificial intelligence. It's about the use of artificial intelligence. So the correct statement would be artificial intelligence for cancer diagnosis is moving into the mainstream.
Sure.
I again, I want to try to remain, positive, but there's so much attention paid to the technology when the actual commercialization process, the adoption process, is based on an application, not on a technology or a platform. And it's like telemedicine. You don't want to go out and talk about telemedicine. You want to talk about how it's applied. And many times that's in a small area or a small application or a niche or a use case. And the thing that makes this more difficult is you've got this thing called the hype cycle.
Oh, there's a whole lot of that going on right now in healthcare.
Oh my gosh. And what is that? What does that do? That moves everyone's focus onto the technology, and that's not what is adopted. It is the application of the technology that's adopted. Just like I had said a moment ago, Everett Rogers was very, very narrow in his studies. It was a new type of seed specifically for corn farmers in Iowa. so it's not like he was out talking about new innovations for farmers. No, it was very specific in terms of the application or use. And so I think we get, and we meaning, the innovation community gets hung up on the technology or the platform, and there's not enough attention paid to what is really moving through the adoption life cycle, and that's the application. So
I think the customer voice is so fundamentally missing from majority of these commercialization strategies and plans. Even the most patient-centric solutions and patient-centric businesses more often have never actually spoken to patients. Or if they have, they ignore them. So
that's a big part of it. So let me add to a tiny bit of complexity here, because you'd asked about why it is there's not more success in healthcare innovation. All right, part of that is you need to understand that if someone is an early adopter, it's only for one application, because every application has its own bell curve. So let's just say we're going to look at remote patient monitoring, and you look at different types of applications or use cases. So there's RPM for glucose monitoring, for COPD, for blood pressure, right? Hypertension. You will discover that a health system can be an early adopter for one of those and a laggard for another. Just because they have decided to go first and apply it to, say, blood glucose monitoring, does not mean they're going to be a remote patient monitoring early adopter across the board. That's not the way it is. You go and you look at a leading health system, Geisinger or something. You go, oh, these guys are early adopters. No, they are early adopters for specific applications. I always point to my neighbor, right? My neighbor is an early adopter of electric vehicles, but he refuses to get a COVID vaccination, right? So those are two different applications.
And still has satellite TV, right? or cable TV.
Yeah. But those are both new innovations. and he's early on one and an absolute laggard on the other. So you can't look at someone's behavior in the past and say, oh, I know what kind of person this is. No, it is application specific. Everything that comes along is different because they're reevaluating their acceptance of risk each time.
So how do you find out who are the innovators, who are the early adopters, who's the early majority, late majority, and laggards?
Yep. All right. So, and I love it. And this is, and you need to stop me if I start to speak too much about this company I'm working with, but the best way to do it is go through the adoption sequence and pay attention. So you want to start out with a new innovation and attract innovators, because remember, these are each sort of, it's like a baton. It's like the race, right? Where you pass a baton from one runner to the next, right? So someone takes the baton, runs a lap, hands it to the next guy, they run a lap. That's the way the innovation process works. So you start out, the very first is the innovator. They run the lap and hand it to the early adopter. Okay. All right. So you need the buy off or the acceptance of innovators. So you go out and you find innovators first. And the way we did that recently, and by the way, it's worked like magic, is we went to a scientific conference. The Heart Failure Society of America has a scientific meeting every year. We went and gave a presentation on this new, essentially ankle edema monitor, and all of the people who are true innovators came to us and said, wow, that's great. All right. So now that they've had a chance to see it, use it, work with it, understand the technology, they're going over to all the different early adopters they know and going, hey, you guys should look at this. So it's like they help the process start from one adopter group to the next. And then once you work with the early adopters, then they're going to say, okay, here are the people in the mainstream you should probably go to first. And they're going to help promote. So you pay attention to the adoption sequence, and you essentially take your brand new innovation to innovators, and they tend to hang out in scientific conferences, certain events, places where they can find things that are brand new. You go there and you hang out with them, and the CEO of this company is just amazed at how well this is working, and
because it works, Warren.
It does. And I've done the same thing in industry after industry after industry. You go and you use the adoption sequence. You find innovators first. They will then take it out into the broader market, just like early adopters will. But if you go straight to the mainstream, that's why you fail. And you assume that someone is an early adopter because of past behavior. No. Be careful.
Hey, it's Dr. Roxy here with a quick break from the conversation. Are you trying to figure out what moves you need to make to survive and thrive in the new COVID economy? I want every health innovator to find their most viable and profitable pivot strategy, which is why I created the COVID Proof Your Business Pivot Kit. The Pivot Kit is a step-by-step framework that helps you find your best pivot strategy. It walks you through 6 categories you need to examine for a 360-degree view of your business. I call them the 6 critical pivot lenses. As you make your way through this comprehensive kit, you'll be armed with the tools, tips, and strategies you need to make sure you can pivot with speed without missing out on critical details and opportunities. Learn more at legacy-dna.com/kit. In so many are not paying any attention to this diffusion of innovation model whatsoever. So
Right.
they're not aligning where they are in the innovation process, where the market is in the innovation process.
Yep.
And so their branding, their messaging, their positioning, all of their strategy, targeting, everything is misaligned. And
Yes.
so they're spending tons and tons of money and time trying to twist the arms of
Oh,
all of the laggards
right.
and the late majority
Right.
into, come on, you have a problem. And then they're like, you're an idiot that you don't know that you have this problem because I can solve it for you.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. All right. So that you just reminded me of something that is really, really important. So you had on your show, one of your recent shows, I think it's Marina and Eugene.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay. All right. So why have they been so successful? Well, part of the reason is they are the founder, but they are also the customer. This is someone who is creating a solution that they needed themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's my understanding, Marina, had breast cancer, recovered from that, needed a health coach, and decided because of difficulty finding what she needed, she actually became a health coach herself. All right. So think about this in terms of problem definition. When someone is creating something that they need themselves, they know all of the different dimensions of the problem, right? So she knows the first order, the second order, the third order, the fourth order problems that need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're on the outside, just going to talk to customers and you say, okay, I think you have this problem. Let's talk about these problems that you have. Sure, the customer would say, okay, I have this problem, but they'll probably talk about the first order or the most super, the biggest area of the problem. And they won't say a lot about, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. And that's why coming from the outside to try to figure out how to solve a problem is way harder than if you're solving the problem for yourself. And the everyday examples, that I throw around, there were a group of people who couldn't find the shoes that they wanted. So they went and created Zappos. I think it's called Zappos. There were people who had extra space in their house and needed some extra money. So they created Airbnb. It's when the founder is the customer that you actually have tremendous success. Now that's not always possible, but boy, if you're an investor, that's what you want to look for, right? Because those people know the problem inside and out, and it is the key to great returns and a lot of success.
So the only thing that I would add to that is that I have seen some of those founders that have experienced the problem to have some bias where their personal experience isn't always reflective of the entire market.
Yep.
So I think just being mindful of being able to validate that.
Yes.
And is it just me that's experienced this problem in this way, or is it a broader market that's a viable market for me to actually bring a business model to?
Yeah. So that and that's a great point. So remember, we speak in terms of applications, and if you solve a problem for farmers in Iowa, you then need to think about, okay, who's second? What are the farmers in Nebraska like? Are they a little bit different? Are the requirements going to change? So you are absolutely correct. And you do develop an initial solution based on what you know the best, especially if you've had the problem. However, there's no guarantee that the follow-on segments or the follow-on applications are going to be exactly the same. Probably they will not be. So it's part of that reinvention process that never stops, never.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to take us to a conversation around passing the baton. So when you describe this model of passing the baton from audience segment to audience segment, or you describe it as the innovators are the ones that are like first initially enthusiastically excited about this, and then they can't wait to tell the early adopters that they know, and how this trickle effect happens.
Yes.
Sounds a lot like word of mouth communication,
Uh-huh.
which plays a very, very critical role in commercialization. And I would say is more often than not overlooked. So speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is again something that I might step on a few toes
Okay,
when I
we're
say
comfortable with doing that,
okay
dear.
when I say this. Um, Unfortunately, especially with a new innovation that is unknown and it's in a market and people are not really familiar with the technology or the company or the application of the technology, what the vendor says does not matter, right? Because you have a situation.
Say that one more time.
Yeah. And I, and this is in direct conflict with a huge community that spends all their time on what's called storytelling. Well, if you just told the story and you'd engage, and you'd get people to understand what you're about. No, not until it's not until you have the support of the marketplace that customers really decide it's time to take you seriously. Because the thing I always envision is an inverted pyramid. So you're at the bottom, or the vendor or the founders at the bottom, the prospective customers are at the top, and in between are all of these different groups that can either help you or hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
There's associations, there's partners that you actually might have. There are complementary suppliers. There are, of course, not just journalists and publications, but there are industry analysts, there are consultants, there are all kinds of people in that market space. Well, if they support you, then it is a huge deal, but you've got to give them credible evidence that they should support you. Yeah. So you start from the bottom of this inverted pyramid and you begin this education process where you move up the layers and show them credible proof of what you've got. Then when it's time for customers to say, oh, we should look at this, and they start reaching out to their network. Hey, what do you think about this? And maybe they'll go to a trade show. Maybe they'll go, to some kind of conference. Maybe they'll just get on the phone. Maybe they'll go onto LinkedIn. They'll reach out to people they feel are credible sources of information. And if they say, oh yes, I've heard of this new company and their new innovation, and I've seen evidence that it works, that is the magic that can happen with word of mouth. Reverse is also true. If the customer reaches out to their network, so what do you think about this new thing? And all they get is, I don't know, I've never heard of it. I have no idea. Or, well, I've heard of it, but it's unproven. Then, well, the entire mainstream, at least, will step back and go, okay, I'm not ready to engage. And
think of all the examples that is happening in healthcare right now.
Yeah, it's actually a framework that I've used for many years, and it's just called infrastructure education. Some people call it market relations, and I've got a little guide that I could send to you, Dr. Roxy, if you'd like, and you can make it available.
Yep. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's how you really need to understand who is trusted in your market, how you need to educate them with certain kinds of proof, and how they will then reinforce your message. And then you can go directly to the end user or the prospective customer. And of course, maybe you've seen some of the latest Gartner studies. Customers don't like to have a salesperson present for most of the buying process. That's
No, I
really
think statistically, it's like 80% of the buying process happens before the brand ever is even aware of it. Right?
Bingo. That's exactly the numbers, or the range of numbers I've seen. Is I had seen like 83% of the whole buying cycle, the vendor or the supplier is not allowed to participate. So
And if
you
they
got
do get involved, we don't trust what they say anyway.
right, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but there was one other thing that's somewhat related to this that I wanted to be sure and mention if we still have a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you always have to keep in mind that a new innovation provides, many times great benefits, but it also makes the end user give something up. All right. So, like, for example, I'll use that electric car example again. Yeah, an electric car is cheap, right? Electricity to so-called refuel your car, that's cheap. That's great. That's a super benefit. But what do you give up? Well, you don't find a charging station on every corner like you do gas stations. So it's not easy to refuel. So you give up that convenience in order to get low cost. If you use online grocery shopping, right? That's great, a lot of benefit. What do you give up? You don't get to pick your own tomatoes.
And they bring the wrong stuff.
And they bring the
and now I have to go back to the grocery store just to return what I didn't want.
Exactly. So or they gave you they brought you the tomato you wanted. It's just a lousy looking tomato that you never would have selected, right?
Warren, this happened to me just a few weeks ago. I don't know. I really didn't investigate this to see if it was my error or their error, but I'm going to blame them because that just feels better for me. But I got, instead of one bag of the little halo oranges, I got 5.
Right.
So I had 5 pounds of little halo oranges for just my husband and I in the house.
Right. Yes. So
a lot of eating oranges that week.
Yeah. So a lot of innovations are like this. You get, there's a benefit, but there's a cost, and no one wants to talk about the cost. All right. All right. Here's one that you might find kind of shocking, and I say that because I was stunned, is I had the chance to do a lot of interviewing of nurses recently. So there's, in this area where I live, there's the University of Washington Medical Center. So I'm interviewing a nurse. She's been a nurse for 25 years, lots of experience. She said she had worked in every department on every floor of the entire complex. So she knows nursing in every setting, right? Yep. And I said, so what do you think about electronic health records? And she goes, when I first started as a nurse, my 12-hour shift, in a 12-hour shift, I spent 11 hours providing care directly for patients. 11 out of 12 hours, I'm working directly with a patient. Electronic health records come along, and now I can only spend 7 hours out of 12 directly caring for patients. Yeah. So just the maintenance of electronic health records, like, Epic and others, that took 4 hours of a shift, of each and every shift, away from the patient.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about a big hit, a big cost. And she knew that, I was interviewing her because I'm working on a new digital health device, right?
Yep.
And she
Yep.
and she got this very, very sad look on her face, and she said, please don't hurt my patients any more than you already have.
Mm. Well,
You think
isn't
about,
that the sentiment for a lot of clinicians
yeah,
around the world?
you
Yeah.
think about, and do you ever hear anyone talk about the cost? There's clearly benefits to electronic health records. I mean, you get to see all of the previous medications and diagnoses and all of these things, and they're great. But whoever stops to say, and oh, by the way, in a 12-hour shift, the actual patient loses 4 hours of attention.
Mm.
No one ever says that. Um, and again, I hate to step on toes, but we need to look at telemedicine with the same kind of evaluation filters. You and I were talking about going back to in-person events and how
Mm-hmm.
wonderful it is to connect with people face to face.
Yep.
Okay. There's a cost of telemedicine. It's called, you don't have the personal connection with the doctor because, human to human connection, we look at whether or not people maintain eye contact. We look at their body posture. All these things you do face to face are removed in telemedicine visits,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the foundation of trust that is
Yeah.
lost in a telemedicine environment. And that's a big hit. Actually, that's a big hit. So um, I would say, we absolutely need to start being realistic about what is given up in order to actually benefit from an innovation. What do people have to lose? And it's not trivial. It's not.
That takes a lot of empathy, a lot of understanding, some time, maybe even some additional resources to be able to understand that situation.
Yep.
And I think it also requires us as innovators to put our ego at the door, that recognizing or acknowledging that we don't have all the answers.
Yep. Yep.
And that our businesses will be better suited for us to be able to make those investments early on and communicate that to investors, communicate that to the board, and get the leadership and get that buy-in, even if we have to slow down the process a little
Right.
bit, but to be able to do it right and start moving the needle together.
Absolutely. And you just need to recognize, all of the dimensions of the current interaction. That's one of those things I mentioned earlier. I had put together a new model, which I call the low risk recipe. Right. It's and one of the biggest pieces of that is you have to try to let people continue to use what they're using today. Is there a way to take a new innovation and just add it to what is already being done? Don't go in, and my least favorite word in the world is disruption.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
I
And everybody's
hate
so excited about it.
I hate that word. In fact, if you want to minimize the downside of an innovation, if you want to accelerate acceptance, accelerate adoption, you try to keep it so people can use what they're already using. It's the magic of Thomas Edison, right? When he first develops the electric light bulb, he looks around and he goes, "Oh, look, all these people are using gas lamps." So they have these tubes that deliver gas into their houses. He goes, "You know what? I bet we should just run electric wires through these tubes because they're already in place. We're not going to say, hey, you have to go tear those out and put in new wires somewhere else. Let's use what's in place today, right? And it was one of the things, and it's one of those things that allowed electric light to just skyrocket. And it's like, don't force change if you can avoid it.
So Warren, we have absolutely ran out of time. We've actually gone over today, but it's just so good. I want to continue this conversation in a series of episodes with you and I. There's just so much for us to talk about. And we certainly can't cover everything in one episode. So folks, be on the lookout for more of Warren on our show. We will be doing more of these together. So just as we wrap up, how can people get a hold of you if they want to follow up with you between now and the next episode together?
Absolutely. So I have a website. It's called hightechstrategies.com. And, that would be an easy place. And there's some resources there also, right? There's and the guides that I mentioned and the frameworks are all there. There's actually free interactive infographics where you can go on the adoption curve and see where you are and see if all of your business systems are lined up with the customer. Right. So it's a lot of fun and it's all free. And then of course, LinkedIn, it's, my LinkedIn extension is just my name, Warren Schirtzinger. So either place.
Thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing your wisdom with our audience. I know they all got a lot out of it, and hopefully it changes the trajectory of their business success.
It absolutely is there and available. It just, you have to understand it and use it. So I'm happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're busy working to bring your life-changing innovation to market, and I value your time and attention. To get the latest episodes on your mobile device automatically, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate everyone who shared the show with friends and colleagues. See you on the next episode of Health Innovators.